Hey Siri, how many days ago was April 6th?
It was 69 days ago.
69 days. Okay, so here we have a bin, 69 days of age. And earlier today, I shot a video pertaining to the same subject, which was taking the bin, getting it out of the phase that it's in right now. The phase that it's in right now is sort of the tail end of its feeding phase and compost making phase, with the past few weeks of that feeding phase consisting of it getting no new feedings and it being given the time to break down whatever remains within the bin. Now, if you watch my channel regularly, this might sound familiar. I did post a video earlier today where I did the same exact thing to another of my bins, but I had technical issues and somehow I managed to miss the most interesting part of the process, which was the part where I go through where I think the most worms are, and well, that part of it just got skipped. So the process was thoroughly explained and demonstrated in that video, but there weren't many worm sightings. This being one of my most heavily populated bins, we're almost guaranteed to have some worm sightings, regardless of where we look within the bin. So since I've got to do a similar setup in this bin as what I did earlier today on my other bin, I figured I'd shoot it again, do another video. Hopefully I won't mess up with the camera this time, so let's get this thing started. Now, in that other video I went through a great deal of explaining, because that video is really intended to be part of a sort of an instructional tutorial, sort of a playlist, so it's a little bit more verbose than it needs to be. Here I do not plan to get into as much explanation. I'm just going to keep plugging along, and I might chit-chat here and there, but I guess the main purpose here is going to be to get most of the material over to the side and set up a new place in this bin that's going to be geared towards attracting all the worms out of the finished compost. Here there's been no central feeding zone or focused feeding zone for a number of weeks now. We already did that process of removing the large slow composting food chunks from the material, and I had moved those out of this bin into a different bin to continue their breakdown process, leaving this as a tub of almost all castings, with still, bits and pieces of thin leafy material, possibly paper, it's hard to tell what it is, and other bedding materials, but probably very little food. Like I said, I tried to pull the majority of the food out. There's always a chance that I missed bits and pieces, or there were small pieces that I just didn't bother screening out. Those I just left behind. In fact, I think there was actually a collection of a few bits, sort of like what I had collected right here off of the top surface, and I had thrown them right into the middle and said, it seemed like a shame to extract that at that time. I figured I would just leave it and let them have it. Let them work on that as well as all the other material in the bin. Here's the stem of some sort of a piece of veggie. It's something that I probably would have cleared out last go around if it had come across my way, or who knows, maybe I did find it last time and I just left it. But I would doubt that we would find any other food scraps much larger than that, if any. I guess sort of like we saw in my other bin too, if you saw that video. There's sticks and stems in here, plenty of them, and I do remember mentioning a few weeks ago or a few videos ago how I was gonna try to use this material, all these sticks and stems of the leaves, as a measure of how ready or complete the castings material is. However, I think I just sort of had a little change of heart. I don't see any reason why I can't initiate the horizontal migration and also expect that material would eventually get broken down by the worms as they eventually clear out all the remaining food within the material. And if they have to just end up abandoning it because they can't finish it in time, and they migrate out of the castings material in favor of a more freshly built feeding zone and bedding stash, then I wouldn't blame them then. So now we're just poking around. This is where the previous feedings would have been, but like I said, I had fished out as much as I could Here and there we might find a piece of bedding or who knows whatever, but probably not much. Hopefully nothing big, although there's always that chance that I may have missed something. This material is really nicely broken down. The only thing about it is all these little sticks and stems that come in when I put in the leaves. Leaves is just one of those things that I use as my bedding and slash food source in all of my bins. And along with the leaves always comes their little stems. In other bins of mine that have gone longer, maybe closer to 200 days of age, in those bins you don't see this sort of material, but I guess a bin this age, less than 70 days, less than 10 weeks old, just might be too early to expect to see those types of more tough, hard materials being broken down completely. So I guess I'm going to begin pushing stuff over. I guess there's no real right or wrong place in this case. I'm just going to push to the right. I think in the other bin I had set up the feeding zone on the right, so this time we'll set up the feeding zone over here on the left. But you can see that this material is pretty heavily populated with worms. The one thing that you might also be noticing, I'm not sure if it's coming through on the video or not, but the material is a little bit more dry and crumbly. I mean, I can't say that the material is dry. Here, I've not yet seen one section of this material that's so damp that it would clump or stick together. Everywhere I look, it's just very flaky, you know, like a powder snow almost. If you just give it a little bit of a crunch like you would powder snow to make a snowball out of it, it would, you know, hold together, but you know, you would throw it against something and it would just shatter into dust. And I think that's how this material is. It's just really nice and flaky, exactly the way you want your vermicompost to be. If you're the type of person who eventually wants to run this material through a sieve, you know, to make sure that you're catching all these little uncomposted little bits and pieces, then this material is almost dry enough to do that, I think. Might benefit from a little bit more drying. Wouldn't really need much, but a little bit more drying just to ensure that it is all crumbly enough to just go right through the sieve. Although, you know, as I keep handling more and more of it as I go through, I've still not yet found anything, even down here at the very bottom. I've not yet found any material that I could classify as, you know, being wet or excessively damp. I'm going to try to grab some of this stuff that I had sort of collected off the top. It's sort of a little collection of stuff that appeared to me like it was still slightly larger, uncomposted bedding and food scraps. Mostly bedding from the look of it. Just going to kind of keep it together because at some point here, after we create a little place to do it, we'll set up this fresh feeding zone slash, well, you know, it's almost like building a fresh new bin, right? You're setting up an environment that you're trying to lure the worms into because it's comfortable and abundantly stocked with nourishment and food, nice and damp. So what we're going to be doing is creating that environment for them over on this end of the bin, so as to encourage them out of this beautiful castings material. And once they exit this beautiful castings material, we'll be able to harvest it. The more we can remove stuff like this, you know, old banana peel stem, anything I encounter as I'm going along, you can see I'm just trying to pull it out unless it's just really minuscule stuff. Anything larger like that would be enough of a distraction for them to just remain in the compost for a little while longer while then they nibble on that, rather than getting on the move and looking for a place where there's a greater abundance of food. Because at this point, this material is definitely running low on food. You know, it's really, really nicely broken down, really awesome stuff. I wish I could make my feeding zone larger, but I feel like I've just got nowhere to go. I mean, I'm already over the rim of this bin, and hopefully I'll be able to, like, you know, push some of it back after we build this feeding zone and level it off so that we could just throw a top on it and not have everything just, you know, overflowing at the top brim. But that was the main reason. That was the catalyst for us deciding that it was just time to stop feeding this bin, was the simple lack of space to continue feeding And I had also kind of hoped that, over time a lot of this lingering scraps, a lot of this little stuff would all get broken down enough to reduce the volume within the bin, but it didn't really do much. Alright, so that was kind of cool. All those worms in there, right? Just gently moving it all over, bit by bit, over into this little collection pile, over onto this edge of the bin, and getting the chance to look at all the material all the way through. You can see it's all very heavily populated with worms that all look really healthy and happy, and all the material seems to be very consistently moist, but not, overly damp. So it's a really great batch. I love how this bin's coming along. Okay, so let's build up a nice new spot for these little guys. Well, we're going to begin by putting in some leaves, and we'll use this little cardboard divider partition wall. Something I sometimes do, not always, when I'm doing horizontal migrations. Sometimes I just proceed with laying in the bedding and the food, but sometimes I just like to have a little partition there, just so I can more clearly see where the line was, where the finished compost was, and where the feeding zone starts. Sometimes it really blurries, sometimes it gets hard to see. Man, that's all the leaves that I have. What a bummer. Oh well. I was kind of hoping that I'd be able to build this up to a pretty high level, almost equal to this, but I don't think I've got that much material here. I guess the other thing we were hoping to do, and I guess we're not going to have a feeding zone that's quite as large either. I was really hoping to return back in this direction a little bit with some of this material to get the level down under the rim here, right? So, or at least as best I can. Over here I can't be that high, otherwise it'll just spill over into the feeding zone. So I'll just gently slope my way down here, attempting not to spill anything over. Not bad. Although I got a feeling once the worms, realize what's happening over here and they start coming over for this, it's going to it's going to get occupied pretty quickly. It's going to get jammed with worms in no time. Any food that I put in here is going to get gobbled right up. So I'm definitely going to have to be on the ball with this bin. Maybe instead of waiting, 8 or 10 or I don't know how many days, maybe I should give myself only about a week this time to make sure that this bin doesn't go too hungry too long. Although I usually go pretty frequently with these bins. I believe it was 8 days ago last time we checked in on this bin. And I think at that time we may not have even done anything other than inspect the contents. Okay, just trying to figure out, how I'm going to do on space in here as I put stuff in. Thinking this stuff can go on the very end. It'll be a nice cover, kind of matching this material. So we'll begin with the food. So I was going to renew this idea of something I did in this other bin of mine where I had taken their feedings and used pieces of paper to wrap each feedings portions into. So you end up with these little dumplings of food, which conveniently are delivered this way with a little bit of bedding material right there as well. It's a process that seems to work quite nicely. I've had pretty good luck with it in the past, so hopefully it's just another good application of it here. I think I've got room enough to maybe put in 4 or 5 of these. We'll see how it goes. Alright, 5 of these little dumplings fit in here quite nicely. About right, and we'll go ahead and add some grit. Always a good thing to include with your feedings. We'll see if we can top it all off with a sprinkling of coffee. Always looking for a chance to get rid of some of my collected coffee. It's always piling up. Thank heaven for the worms. Alright, so this is where we are. I think we've got the level down to a manageable level. I'll be able to cover up again without feeling like I've exceeded the the level of the bin rim, and once I put these items in here to cover up with as well, all these collected little scraps of whatnot I found across the top, we'll have even a better chance to kind of rake this stuff level, remove any sort of high spots. Now we can cover up quite nicely. I had always kept my my plastic right over all of this material to encourage the recirculation of any water, moisture that would want to evaporate out of the material. Plastic would just always capture it and let it drip right back down into the material. However, now we're going the other direction. We want this material to dry out a little bit even more, even though it's got a nice flaky consistency to it. We'd like it to continue drying, airing out, and as it gets drier and drier, the worms will eventually start to find that it's maybe just a little bit too dry for their liking, and that'll encourage them to get on the move and eventually work their way over to where we're going to keep a piece of plastic, which will be right over this feeding zone. And here, the moisture within the bin will continue to recirculate, and there'll be nice dampness over here. And hopefully that, in addition to the food, will amount to a nice, comfortable spot that lures in the worms in this bin pretty quickly. Usually what happens is that this section does get pretty heavily populated pretty quickly. The food gets gobbled up 1, 2, 3, so it will be necessary to keep tabs on it. I feel bad for these little worms that came along for the ride. These little guys have been out here in the dry. Must have been a little bit uncomfortable for them, but they seem to be okay. My little plastic is getting pretty dirty. Guess I'll keep the side of it that's a little bit cleaner inside, and we'll use the dirty side to cover up. Like I said, only over the feeding zone. We're going to be giving the rest of this material a chance to air out. Although I do like to still cover up, so I'm going to use a piece of paper for that. You can see I'm not taking great care to cover the material corner to corner, edge to edge. It just kind of covers most of it, mainly because I like it for my cardboard on top not to be resting right on the castings material. I want this stuff to stay sort of clean if possible. I'll leave the lower layers of material to get dirty. Alright, so I think that went pretty well, and that was kind of fun looking at all those worms within that material. Amazing for a 10-week-old bin, a bin that's not even 10 weeks old. The one thing about this bin, though, was that it was started with a tremendous number of worms. I think I've mentioned it before. The estimate is somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 worms in this bin, and it's not a very large bin, but it's got a very great amount of weight, because that's the interesting thing about castings. It's a real dense material and has a lot of weight, even for kind of a small quantity. So that's why I'm more than happy to have bins this size. Some people have much larger bins. I don't know how they carry them. This is my size. Perfect amount for me. Alright everyone, well, hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to give me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. Also consider becoming a subscriber to the channel as well. That's really appreciated too. Thanks everyone, have a great day. Bye now.